The first thing Adrian Blackwood heard was the sound of his own front door closing. Not slamming, closing. Slowly, carefully, almost respectfully. As though the people leaving hadn't just stolen his entire life. Silence followed. The kind of silence that seemed to press against the walls, against his chest, against the darkness that had surrounded him for the last 8 years. Adrian didn't move. His fingertips remained resting on the smooth oak armrest of the leather chair his late father had once loved. He listened. The grandfather clock ticked. Rain tapped gently against the enormous windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed. No footsteps. No voices. No apology. Only silence. Then, a phone vibrated on the coffee table. Once. Twice. 3 times. It stopped. Another notification arrived. Then another. Adrian reached toward the sound with practiced precision. His fingers found the phone. He pressed the voice assistant. The mechanical voice spoke. 27 unread messages. He smiled faintly. For a moment, hope. Maybe someone had realized what had happened. Maybe Ethan had come to his senses. Maybe this nightmare wasn't over. Read messages. The first message played. Mr. Blackwood, your authorization to access Blackwood Holdings has been revoked. The second. Your company email has been permanently disabled. The third. Your bank accounts are temporarily frozen, pending ownership verification. The fourth. Your scheduled board meeting has been cancelled. The fifth. Your security detail has been reassigned. One by one, everything disappeared. Not because strangers had taken it, because family had. Adrian lowered the phone into his lap. He didn't cry. He couldn't. Some pain is too large for tears. It simply leaves a person empty. 3 hours earlier, his younger brother had held Adrian's hands. The same hands that had pulled him from a burning car 8 years ago. The same hands that had taught him how to throw a baseball, how to tie a tie, how to sign his first business contract. Ethan's voice had trembled. I'm sorry, Adrian. You've become too vulnerable to run the company. The board thinks this is best. Adrian had believed it was concern, until the lawyer began reading. Every document, every signature, every transfer, every power of attorney Adrian had trusted Ethan to prepare over the years, had quietly stripped him of everything. The company, the estate, the investment accounts. Even the penthouse he was sitting in. It had all been legal, because Adrian had signed every page, blindly, trusting the one person he had never imagined would deceive him. When the meeting ended, the lawyer packed his briefcase. The board members avoided speaking. His fiancée removed the engagement ring from her finger. Not dramatically, not with anger. Simply, as though she were returning something that had never belonged to her. We're leaving, Adrian. Those were the last words she spoke. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I love you. Just, we're leaving. Then they did. Together. His brother, his fiancée, his lawyer, his directors. The people who had toasted his birthday, vacationed in his homes, shaken his hand, called him family. Every one of them walked away. Now, the apartment felt enormous. Not because it was empty. Adrian leaned back. For the first time since losing his sight, he wished he could see. Not to admire the city skyline, not to look at his wealth. Just to watch the faces of the people who had betrayed him, to know whether they looked ashamed or relieved. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The apartment's automated system spoke. Reminder. Adrian frowned. What reminder? Today is your mother's birthday. He froze. His mother had been gone for 16 years. Every year. He visited her grave with Ethan. Every year. They brought white lilies. Every year. Ethan reminded him not to forget. Today, neither of them had gone. Adrian bowed his head. I'm sorry, Mom. His voice cracked for the first time that day. I couldn't even keep the family together. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, a blind man sat completely alone, unaware that 3 days later, a waitress carrying the wrong food order would knock on the wrong apartment door and refuse to walk away. If you have ever been abandoned by the very people you sacrificed everything for, this story is for you. Welcome to Aurora Cinema Fiction. Stay with us. If this story moves you, please subscribe, like, and share. It means everything to this channel. 8 years earlier, 28-year-old Adrian Blackwood was already one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. Business magazines called him brilliant. Financial analysts called him fearless. His employees simply called him fair. But the title Adrian treasured most had never appeared in a newspaper. Big Brother. Their parents had died within 11 months of each other. Their father first. Their mother not long after. When the lawyers finished reading the wills, and the relatives stopped offering sympathy, only 2 people remained in the Blackwood family, Adrian and 16-year-old Ethan. On the morning after the funeral, Ethan stood in the doorway of Adrian's apartment, holding a single duffel bag. "I don't know what happens now," he whispered. Adrian crossed the room and pulled him into an embrace. "You come home. I'm just saying, I'm your responsibility now." Adrian smiled. "No." He rested a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You're my family. There's a difference." From that day forward, Adrian stopped living for himself. He postponed vacations, cancelled plans, worked through nights that became mornings. He built Blackwood Holdings one impossible contract at a time, while making sure Ethan never felt the weight he carried. He attended every parent-teacher conference, every football game, every graduation. When Ethan forgot his lunch, Adrian delivered it himself. When Ethan failed his first driving test, Adrian laughed harder than Ethan did. When Ethan graduated from university with honors, Adrian stood in the back of the auditorium applauding until his hands hurt. Later that evening, they celebrated in Adrian's office overlooking the city. Ethan turned slowly in the leather chair behind the massive desk. "One day, I want an office like this." Adrian chuckled. "You'll have this one." Ethan looked up. "What do you mean? I'm not building this company for me." Adrian looked through the glass toward the skyline glowing beneath the setting sun. "I'm building it for us." He smiled. "One day, all of this will belong to my little brother." Ethan stared at him. "You'd really give me everything?" "I won't be giving it away." Adrian laughed softly. "It'll already be yours." Ethan hugged him without another word. For a long moment, neither of them noticed the city outside. Years later, Blackwood Holdings employed more than 12,000 people. Its projects reshaped skylines. Its charitable foundation built schools and hospitals across the state. Every Christmas, Adrian increased employee bonuses before calculating executive salaries. Every birthday he visited the same children's hospital without informing the press. The newspapers celebrated his success. Few people understood how quietly he carried it. Then came the night that changed everything. Rain hammered the windshield as Adrian drove through downtown after a charity gala. Ethan sat beside him, talking excitedly about expanding the company overseas. They were laughing, arguing over which restaurant stayed open past midnight. Normal things. The traffic light ahead turned green. Adrian eased into the intersection. Then, headlights. Far too fast. A delivery truck ignored the red light completely. Everything happened inside a single heartbeat. "Ethan." The driver's side of the car disappeared beneath twisted steel. The last thing Adrian remembered was hearing Ethan shouting his name. Then darkness. When Adrian regained consciousness, he could smell antiseptic. Machines beeped steadily around him. His entire body felt impossibly heavy. He tried to open his eyes. Nothing changed. Only darkness. He blinked again. Still nothing. A doctor spoke quietly. "Mr. Blackwood." The hesitation told him everything before the words arrived. "You suffered catastrophic injuries to both eyes. Silence. We're deeply sorry. Another pause. You'll never regain your sight. The room became completely still. Not because Adrian shouted. He didn't. Not because he cried. He couldn't. He simply lay there listening to the sound of his own breathing, while the future he had imagined quietly disappeared. Hours later, another voice entered the room. A familiar one. Adrian. Ethan. Ethan. He was crying. Real tears. I'm so sorry. Adrian reached toward the sound, until his hand found Ethan's shoulder. Are you hurt? Ethan broke completely. You pushed me out. You saved my life. Adrian smiled despite everything. I'd do it again. Ethan buried his face against his brother's hand. You gave me your eyes. Adrian squeezed his shoulder gently. I still have everything that matters. He believed those words, with all his heart. Over the next 8 years, Ethan became Adrian's eyes. He guided him into board meetings. Read contracts aloud. Explained financial reports. Placed documents beneath his hand. Just here, Adrian. Another signature. One more. Another signature. This is only routine. Another signature. Directors admired Ethan's devotion. Employees called him the perfect younger brother. Investors praised his loyalty. No one noticed that every signature shifted something. A percentage of shares, a subsidiary, a trust, voting rights, property ownership, a revised will. Never enough to attract attention, always small enough to feel ordinary. Years passed. Piece by piece, the empire Adrian had built with sleepless nights and impossible sacrifices quietly changed hands. Not through force, through trust, through love. Through the one man Adrian had never imagined protecting himself against. 8 years after the accident, there was almost nothing left in Adrian Blackwood's name, and he never saw it coming. 3 days later, the apartment no longer sounded like a home. It sounded abandoned. The grandfather clock still ticked with perfect precision. The refrigerator still hummed. But people had disappeared. No footsteps crossed the marble floors. No assistant arrived with Adrian's morning schedule. No housekeeper announced breakfast. Silence had become the apartment's newest resident. He had survived mostly on bottled water and half a loaf of bread he had found on the kitchen counter the morning after everyone left. This morning, even the bread had gone stale. He reached for the kitchen counter. His fingers searched carefully until they touched an empty plate. He smiled to himself. So, he whispered, I suppose that's breakfast. The joke disappeared into the empty apartment. Nobody laughed. Across the city, 26-year-old Claire Bennett hurried through the back entrance of Romano's Italian kitchen. She was already 8 minutes late. I'm sorry. She tied her apron while walking. The bus broke down. Her manager barely looked up. You're covering deliveries today. I thought I was waitressing. Not anymore. He handed her a stack of insulated delivery bags. 2 drivers called in sick. Claire nodded without complaining. Complaining never paid rent. She worked mornings at the restaurant, evenings at the public library, and spent most nights caring for her grandmother whose arthritis had become worse that year. Sleep was a luxury she rarely afforded herself. Kindness wasn't. By mid-afternoon, rain had begun falling again. 40 minutes later, she finally reached Blackwood Tower. The building rose above the city, like polished glass, reaching toward the clouds. The concierge looked uncomfortable when she approached. Delivery for Adrian Blackwood. The man's expression changed almost imperceptibly. You can take it upstairs. No signature. He hesitated. No. The elevator climbed in complete silence. Apartment 7401. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. Still nothing. She checked the receipt. Correct address. As she turned to leave, she heard it. A voice. Weak. Almost lost beneath the rain. Come in. She frowned. The door's locked. Several seconds passed. Then, it isn't. Carefully, she pressed the handle. The door opened. The apartment was immaculate, beautiful, expensive, and strangely, wrong. The curtains remained closed despite the afternoon light. Several unopened envelopes lay scattered across the entrance table. A vase of white lilies had begun to wilt. Coffee sat untouched on a side table. Judging by the smell, it had been there for days. "Delivery?" Claire called gently. No answer. She stepped farther inside. Then she saw him. A man sat beside the enormous windows in a dark sweater. Perfect posture. Hands resting calmly on the arms of the leather chair. His face was strikingly handsome despite the faint white scars near his eyes. His unfocused gaze rested somewhere beyond the rain. He hadn't moved. "I'm sorry," Claire said. "I brought your lunch." "I didn't order lunch." His voice was quiet, controlled, almost emotionless. Claire checked the receipt again. Apartment 7401, Adrian Blackwood. The name matched. "I think the restaurant made a mistake. So did life." The words escaped him before he seemed to realize he'd spoken them. There was no bitterness in his voice. Only exhaustion. "I'll just take it back." He nodded once. "Thank you." She turned toward the door, then stopped. Something didn't feel right. 3 unopened milk bottles stood outside the kitchen. Mail had piled beneath the slot. The flowers were dying. The air carried the faint smell of food left untouched. She looked back at Adrian. "When was the last time you ate?" Silence. "I don't remember." Claire stared at him. "You don't remember? It doesn't matter." "It does." "No." He smiled faintly. "It really doesn't." She looked at the man sitting completely alone. A thought crossed her mind. Not dramatic. Just simple. Nobody had checked on him. Not once. She placed the insulated bag gently on the kitchen island. "I'll heat this up." "You don't have to." "I know." She smiled. "I'm going to anyway." Adrian slowly turned his head toward the sound of her voice. "You should leave." Claire removed the food containers from the bag. "I probably should." She opened a drawer until she found cutlery. "But I'm terrible at doing what I probably should." For the first time in 3 days, something inside the apartment changed. It wasn't the silence. It was the feeling that it might not last forever. Claire poured the soup into the pan and turned on the stove. A faint aroma of roasted tomato and basil slowly filled the apartment. It was the first warm smell the penthouse had known in days. She placed everything onto a tray and set it on the coffee table. Adrian reached forward carefully until his fingertips brushed the edge of the bowl. "It's hot." "I warmed it." He picked up the spoon. His movements were careful, but practiced. Claire realized something immediately. He wasn't helpless. He had simply been left alone. She watched him eat. Not because he was hungry, because his body had finally remembered that food existed. After several minutes, he lowered the spoon. "I'd forgotten tomato soup tastes like this." A long silence followed. "Does anyone come to check on you?" "No." "Family?" "No." "Friends?" "No." The word landed heavily. Not bitter. Simply true. She had waited tables long enough to recognize loneliness. This wasn't loneliness. This was abandonment. She picked up her delivery bag. "I should get back to work." Adrian nodded. She walked toward the door. Her hand reached the handle. Then, she turned back. "I'll bring dinner." "You don't have to." "I know. I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to. I don't need charity." Claire looked at him for several seconds. Then she said something so quietly it almost disappeared into the room. "My grandmother says, kindness stops being kindness the moment it expects something back." Adrian lowered his head. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not since before the accident. "I don't even know your name," he said. "Claire." He repeated it softly. "Claire. And you're Adrian." "Apparently." She laughed. A real laugh. Small, warm. It surprised both of them. I'll see you tonight. Before Adrian could protest, the apartment door closed. Back downstairs. The concierge watched Claire approach the lobby. You met him? I did. The older man's expression softened. How is he? Claire frowned. You know him? I've worked here 14 years. He looked toward the private elevator. I watched Mr. Blackwood build half this building. What happened to him? The concierge hesitated. 3 days ago, that lobby was full of expensive cars. Board members. Lawyers. Executives. They all went upstairs. And they all came back down. Without him. Claire's chest tightened. The cleaning staff were dismissed. The driver was let go. The assistants stopped coming. The security team was reassigned. Claire whispered. So he's completely alone. The concierge nodded. Whatever happened? He looked toward the silent elevator again. It broke the strongest man I've ever met. That evening, Claire finished her second shift. Most people hurried home. She walked to the grocery store instead. Fresh vegetables, chicken, rice, tea. She paid with money she'd been saving to repair her grandmother's washing machine. As the cashier handed over the receipt, Claire looked at the bags. She smiled. I'll fix the washing machine next month. An hour later, the penthouse door opened before she knocked. Adrian had been standing nearby. I heard the elevator. Claire held up the grocery bags. I brought ingredients. I thought you said dinner. I changed my mind. I'm making dinner. He sighed softly. You really don't listen. No. She stepped inside. I'm discovering that's one of my better qualities. For the first time in days, the apartment no longer felt like a place waiting to die. It sounded like someone had come home. Days passed. Claire's visits became the rhythm the apartment had forgotten. She did not arrive to fill the silence. She arrived to give it purpose. One evening she found Adrian standing near the grand piano in the corner of the living room. You play? She asked. He smiled faintly. I used to. You still can. I haven't touched it since the accident. Claire didn't press. Instead, she lifted the piano lid herself. Would you mind? He stood quietly for a long moment, then slowly walked toward the bench. His fingers found the keys. The first note came hesitantly, then another, a melody. Simple, beautiful. Somewhere in the middle. His hands stopped moving. I can't. You can. No. His voice was almost a whisper. I keep seeing darkness. Claire looked at him. You don't see darkness. He frowned. You hear music. He rested his hands on the keys. Then, very slowly, he began playing again. That same week, Claire stopped at the public library where she worked her second job. Curiosity got the better of her. She searched the newspaper archives. Adrian Blackwood. Thousands of results appeared. Business awards, charity galas, hospital donations, disaster relief, scholarship funds. There was photograph after photograph of the same man, always smiling, always surrounded by people, always standing slightly behind whoever was receiving the help. Then, one headline caught her attention. Youngest billionaire saves brother in highway crash. Her hand froze on the mouse. She opened the article. A photograph showed firefighters cutting open the twisted remains of a black luxury sedan. The passenger side, almost untouched. The driver's side, completely destroyed. Claire's heartbeat quickened. She read every line, then stopped. The article ended before explaining how Adrian had lost his sight, only that he had suffered life-changing injuries. She leaned back. Something was missing, something important. The next afternoon, fate answered the question for her. She was leaving the apartment when the elevator doors opened. An elderly gentleman stepped out carrying a black medical bag. He stopped when he saw Claire. You must be Claire. She blinked. I'm sorry. I'm Dr. Samuel Harris. I've been Adrian's physician for nearly 20 years. The doctor looked toward the apartment door. He's asleep. He finally rested after lunch. Dr. Harris nodded with quiet satisfaction. Good. He hasn't slept properly since. He caught himself. Claire noticed. Since what? The doctor studied her face. You care about him. I do. You aren't here because of money. Claire almost laughed. What money? For the first time, the old doctor smiled. Then his expression became thoughtful. Perhaps. It's time someone told you the truth. Dr. Harris looked through the tall lobby windows where rain drifted gently across the city. Do you know why Adrian is blind? She shook her head. No. The doctor closed his eyes for a moment. 8 years ago, he was driving home from a charity gala with his younger brother. A truck ignored a red light. Claire listened without breathing. The passenger would have died instantly. But Adrian saw the truck first. He pushed his brother out of the way. The entire impact crushed Adrian's side of the car. The doctor's voice grew quieter. Glass shattered. Metal folded inward. The surgeons worked for 11 hours. They saved his life. But they couldn't save his sight. Claire covered her mouth. He became blind. The doctor nodded slowly. Saving the brother who betrayed him. Silence. He gave away his future. And Ethan repaid him by stealing his past. Claire felt tears fill her eyes. She thought back to Adrian sitting alone in that enormous apartment, to the untouched meals, to the silence, to the way he had never once spoken badly about Ethan, not once. The doctor looked toward the elevator. You know the saddest part? Claire couldn't answer. Adrian still blames himself. He believes he failed as a brother, Claire whispered. But Ethan failed as a human being. Dr. Harris looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Yes, he did. And for the first time since she had knocked on the wrong apartment door, Claire understood that Adrian Blackwood had not simply lost a company. He had lost his sight, his family, his future. And still, he refused to let betrayal decide the kind of man he would become. That evening, she unlocked the penthouse door as quietly as she could. She found Adrian sitting near the open window. He turned his head immediately. I know those footsteps. She smiled softly. You do. They're heavier tonight. She walked closer. How can you tell? You're carrying something. He paused. And it isn't groceries. Claire sat across from him. The city glowed outside. Inside, only the grandfather clock filled the silence. Finally, Adrian broke it. Ask. She looked at him. What? You've wanted to ask me something since you came in. She lowered her eyes. Why didn't you fight? His expression changed. When your brother took everything, you could have hired lawyers. Gone to court immediately. Adrian was silent for so long, Claire thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he cried. She blinked. What? Ethan. He cried while asking me to sign the last documents. He said the board had lost confidence. He said the company needed younger leadership. He promised, Adrian's voice almost disappeared, that he'd take care of me. Claire closed her eyes. He lied. I know. But at that moment, Adrian lowered his head. I believed my little brother. Keep watching, the best part is coming. One afternoon, Claire arrived carrying a chessboard. Adrian laughed. I haven't played in years. You'll beat me anyway. What makes you think that? I looked you up. He groaned. Oh no. You were state champion when you were 16. I was. So. She opened the board. I've already accepted defeat. For the first time. Adrian laughed. Not politely. Not briefly. A real laugh. It filled the apartment so unexpectedly that both of them stopped. Claire smiled. There you are. He looked confused. What? I was wondering where your smile had gone. Downstairs. Someone else had noticed. The concierge watched Adrian walk through the lobby for the first time since the betrayal. Only to the courtyard. Only for 10 minutes. But he walked. Without being asked. without hiding. From across the street, a black luxury SUV remained parked with dark-tinted windows. Inside, Ethan Blackwood lowered the binoculars. For the first time since the betrayal, Ethan heard his brother laugh. Something inside him shifted. Not guilt. Something worse. The realization that Adrian was beginning to live without him. And for the first time, Ethan felt his control slipping. "Who's the woman?" His private investigator handed him a folder. "We're still finding out. I want everything. Name. Family. Work. Friends." The investigator nodded. "Yes, sir." Ethan looked back toward the building. He had expected Adrian to disappear quietly, to remain broken. Instead, someone had entered his life. Someone Ethan had never planned for, and the laughter he had just heard through the binoculars was far more dangerous than anything he had anticipated. That same evening, Claire walked Adrian back into the apartment after their short walk outside. As she helped him remove his coat, someone knocked. 3 firm knocks. Neither of them was expecting anyone. Claire opened the door. A man in his early 60s stood outside, wearing an old Blackwood Holdings security jacket. He removed his cap the moment he saw Adrian. "Mr. Blackwood." Adrian immediately recognized the voice. "Thomas." The older man smiled. "It's good to hear you recognize me. You trained every security officer I've ever hired. I'd know your voice anywhere." Thomas stepped inside. He carried a worn leather folder. "I've been looking for you." Adrian frowned. "I thought Ethan dismissed everyone." "He did." Thomas held out the folder. "But before I left, I made copies." Adrian slowly reached forward. "Copies of what?" Thomas looked directly at Claire, then back at Adrian. "Every document your brother thought nobody would ever question." The room fell silent. Thomas took a slow breath. "I think it's time you learned exactly how long he'd been planning this." Adrian's grip tightened around the folder. Claire looked from one man to the other. Neither of them spoke. Because both of them understood. This wasn't the beginning of the truth. It was only the beginning of Ethan Blackwood's downfall. The leather folder remained unopened for almost a full minute. Not because Adrian was afraid, because he already knew. Whatever was inside would change everything. Thomas placed it carefully on the dining table. "I spent 34 years protecting Blackwood Holdings." He looked at Adrian. "I wasn't about to let your father's legacy disappear without keeping a record." Claire slowly sat beside Adrian. "What's inside?" Thomas exhaled. "Everything." He opened the folder. Inside were copies of board resolutions, property transfers, bank authorizations, share certificates, emails, meeting minutes, every document arranged in perfect chronological order. Thomas slid the first page across the table. "This is where it started." Adrian rested his fingertips on the paper. "I can't read it." Claire swallowed. "I'll read." Her voice was steady, until it wasn't. 3 months after your accident. She looked up. "Ethan requested temporary voting authority while you recovered." Adrian nodded slowly. "I remember. I signed that." Thomas sighed. "That document wasn't temporary." Claire continued reading. "It granted him permanent executive powers, unless voluntarily revoked." The room became silent. "I never heard that part." "You weren't supposed to." Thomas answered quietly. The lawyer read a different version aloud. Claire looked at the signature. Adrian's signature. Perfectly legal. Perfectly stolen. Thomas reached for another document. "And this one. 5 years ago." Claire's breathing slowed. "Ethan transferred 32% of Blackwood Holdings into a private trust. Signed by Adrian Blackwood." She turned another page. Another transfer. Another amendment. Another signature. Each one looked harmless by itself. Together, they formed 8 years of calculated betrayal. Claire finally whispered, "My God." Thomas nodded. "It wasn't one theft. It was hundreds. A little at a time. So slowly no one noticed. Adrian remained perfectly still. No anger, no shouting, only silence. Then, I really never saw him. Thomas looked at him sadly. No, you only saw the little brother you raised. The next morning, Claire called in sick for the first time in 3 years. Instead, she drove Thomas across the city. Their first stop, Blackwood Holdings' former legal advisors. Not all of them had agreed with Ethan. Most had remained silent. One hadn't. An elderly solicitor named Michael Bennett welcomed them into his office. The moment he heard Adrian's name, his shoulders dropped. I've been waiting for this day. Claire frowned. You knew? I suspected. But suspicion isn't evidence. He reached into a cabinet. What? Removed another file. I resigned 18 months ago. Ethan asked me to witness documents I refused to certify. Thomas smiled faintly. I knew you kept copies. Michael nodded. I've spent 18 months hoping someone would ask. Across the city, inside the top-floor office of Blackwood Holdings, Ethan smiled during a board meeting. Profits had reached another record high. His phone vibrated. His private investigator. Ethan answered without leaving the room. What is it? The waitress. What about her? She's been visiting former employees. Ethan's smile disappeared. Who? Thomas. And Michael Bennett. Silence. Ethan stood. Gentlemen, I need to postpone the rest of this meeting. By the time the elevator doors closed, he was already making calls. Find Thomas. Immediately. And if Adrian has those files. His voice hardened. I want them back. No matter what. That evening, Claire returned to the penthouse. She looked exhausted. Adrian heard it instantly. You've been crying. She laughed softly. Am I that obvious? You forgot to say hello. She walked toward him, placed another folder into his hands. We're not alone anymore. Thomas entered behind her. Then Michael. Then another familiar voice. Mr. Blackwood. Adrian's head lifted. Rachel? My executive assistant. Rachel smiled through tears. I never stopped being your assistant. Only Ethan's employee. Another person entered. Then another. Former finance director. Former operations manager. Former accountant. People Adrian had trusted for years. People Ethan had forced out quietly. Within 15 minutes, the apartment that had once echoed with loneliness was full. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Rachel broke the silence. We're coming home. Adrian frowned. What do you mean? She smiled. We're bringing your company back. 3 days later, news exploded across every major business network. Blackwood Holdings under investigation. Anonymous evidence had been delivered simultaneously to financial regulators, corporate auditors, the fraud division, and the district attorney. Every document. Every forged explanation. Every manipulated signature. Every concealed transfer. 8 years. Laid bare. Ethan watched the television from his office. His face turned pale. No. This isn't possible. His phone began ringing. One director resigned. Then another. Banks suspended negotiations. Major investors withdrew. Company shares began falling. By lunchtime, security officers entered Ethan's office. Not his security officers. Federal investigators. The lead investigator placed a warrant on the desk. Mr. Ethan Blackwood. We need you to come with us. For the first time in 8 years, Ethan understood exactly how Adrian had felt. Everything could disappear in a single day. Only this time, it wasn't betrayal. It was justice. The investigators escorted Ethan through the lobby. Camera flashes exploded from every direction. Reporters shouted over one another. Mr. Blackwood, did you steal your brother's company? Is it true the signatures were obtained through fraud? Did you knowingly deceive a blind man? Ethan kept walking. His lawyer shielded him from the cameras. For the first time in his life. No one called him a visionary. No one called him a brilliant businessman. Only one word followed him down the courthouse steps. Betrayer. Adrian took no satisfaction in watching another Blackwood fall. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was overflowing. Journalists packed the public gallery. Former employees filled every remaining seat. The story had become national news. Not because a billionaire had lost his company. Because the victim had been blind. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. Ethan sat beside his legal team. His expensive suit looked exactly the same. His confidence did not. Across the aisle, Adrian entered quietly. Thomas guided him. Claire walked beside him. Every head in the courtroom turned. None expected the calm man now taking his seat. No anger. No bitterness. Just quiet dignity. The proceedings began. For hours, documents were presented. Financial records, email correspondence, witness testimony. One after another, former executives stood and told the same story. We questioned the transfers. We were dismissed. We tried to warn him. He trusted his brother too completely. Then, Thomas was called. He explained every copied document, every hidden amendment, every false reading of legal papers. Finally, Michael Bennett testified. He looked directly at the judge. I resigned because I refused to participate in deceiving a blind man who believed every word his brother spoke. The courtroom became silent. Then Ethan took the stand. His lawyer nodded encouragingly. Ethan cleared his throat. I never intended to hurt Adrian. I only wanted to protect the company. The judge looked up. By transferring every asset into your own name, it was necessary. So dismissing loyal employees was necessary. They opposed change. And removing your brother from his own home. Ethan hesitated. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Blackwood. Did your brother trust you? Ethan lowered his eyes. Yes. Completely? Yes. And you used that trust to obtain legal control of his assets. Silence. The judge waited. Ethan couldn't answer. Because there was no answer that wasn't the truth. The courtroom doors opened quietly. An elderly nurse entered. Dr. Harris walked beside her. Claire frowned. You called them? Thomas nodded. There was one truth the court deserved to hear. Dr. Harris took the witness stand. He looked toward Adrian, then toward Ethan. I've treated Mr. Adrian Blackwood since the night of his accident. He opened a medical file. The injuries that caused his blindness were sustained while shielding another passenger during a high-impact collision. He paused. That passenger was Ethan Blackwood. The courtroom froze. Several reporters stopped writing. Even the judge remained silent. Dr. Harris continued. Mr. Adrian Blackwood permanently lost his eyesight while saving his younger brother's life. He never once expressed regret. He told me, Dr. Harris smiled sadly, if Ethan gets another chance to live, then I didn't lose my sight for nothing. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye turned toward Ethan. He couldn't look at his brother. He couldn't even look at the floor. Because for the first time, the whole world knew exactly what Adrian had sacrificed, and exactly what Ethan had done with that sacrifice. Claire quietly wiped away tears. Thomas lowered his head. Across the gallery, several former employees openly cried. Not because Adrian had won, but because they finally understood. The greatest thing he had ever built was never Blackwood Holdings. It had been the life of the brother who betrayed him. 6 months later, spring returned to the city. So did Adrian Blackwood. Not as the billionaire newspapers once celebrated, as something far greater. The courtroom had restored every company illegally taken from him. Every account, every property, every share. Blackwood Holdings once again belonged to the man who had built it. The first decision Adrian made surprised everyone. He refused to reclaim Ethan's penthouse. He refused to move back into the mansion. Instead, he remained in the apartment where he had lost everything. Claire laughed when she asked why. You own half the skyline again. You could live anywhere. Adrian smiled. This is where I learned the difference between people who stayed because I was wealthy. He reached for her hand. And the one who stayed after I had nothing. Blackwood Holdings held its first shareholders meeting under Adrian's leadership. The auditorium was filled beyond capacity. Employees stood along the walls. Many had worked there for decades. Many had resigned after Ethan's betrayal. Now, they had returned. Thomas stood beside the stage. Rachel smiled from the front row. Michael Bennett sat quietly near the back. Claire remained where she always preferred. Away from the cameras, Adrian stepped onto the stage. The audience rose together, not because he was wealthy, because they respected him. The applause lasted almost 2 minutes. When it finally settled, Adrian spoke. My father taught me something when I was very young. A business isn't measured by what it owns. It's measured by the people who trust it. He paused. I lost that trust once. Not because people failed me. Because I trusted one person so completely that I stopped asking questions. He smiled gently. I won't make that mistake again. The room remained silent. Then Adrian continued. Today, Blackwood Holdings will establish the Blackwood Vision Foundation. Several reporters looked up. The foundation will provide free education, employment, and assistive technology for people who are blind or visually impaired. He smiled. I can't give someone back their sight, but perhaps I can help them see a future. The room erupted into applause. Across the city, Ethan watched the broadcast from a small correctional facility visitation room. His sentence had not been the longest allowed, but it was enough. Enough to lose everything. Enough to spend years thinking about choices that could never be undone. His lawyer quietly placed an envelope on the table. Your brother asked me to give you this. Ethan frowned. Inside, there was only a handwritten letter. No anger, no accusations, just a few lines. Dear Ethan, 8 years ago, I'd still save you. Not because you deserved it, because that's the kind of man I chose to be. I hope one day, you choose to become someone your younger self would have been proud of. Goodbye. Ethan read the letter again, then again. For the first time since childhood, he cried. Not because he had been punished, because he finally understood what he had thrown away. 1 year later, Claire finished her final shift at the cafe. She untied her apron, folded it carefully. The owner smiled. You'll be missed. Claire laughed. Claire laughed. I'll still come back for coffee. Outside, a familiar black sedan waited. Thomas stood beside it, pretending not to notice her. I've been instructed to bring someone to the park. Claire smiled. By who? I've learned not to ask Mr. Blackwood questions when he's smiling. The city park overlooked the river. Spring flowers covered the gardens. Children laughed nearby. Birds sang from the trees. Adrian stood beside the old fountain. He turned as Claire approached. I heard your footsteps. She smiled. I know. He reached into his jacket. Not for a business document. Not for a speech. For a small velvet box. Claire covered her mouth. Adrian laughed softly. I can't kneel without embarrassing myself. So, I'll stand. She was already crying. You walked into my life carrying the wrong food order. You refused to leave when everyone else did. You reminded me that blindness wasn't the darkest thing that had ever happened to me. Losing trust was. He reached for both of her hands. You gave it back. He opened the box. A simple platinum ring. No cameras. No reporters. No audience. Just 2 people. Claire. Will you spend the rest of your life walking beside me? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and whispered through tears. Yes, Adrian smiled. I can't see you. Claire rested his hand against her cheek. You don't have to. I'm right here. Around them. The park continued exactly as it always had. Children laughed. The river flowed. The wind moved gently through the trees. Ordinary sounds. For an ordinary afternoon. Except for one blind man who had once believed his life ended the day everyone he loved walked away. He had been wrong. Because sometimes, the greatest blessing doesn't arrive through the front door with applause. Sometimes, it knocks by mistake, carrying the wrong food order, and refuses to leave. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to Aurora Cinema Fiction. Leave a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching from. You might be surprised how many people felt exactly what you just felt. And remember, every story we tell is made with one purpose: to make you feel deeply and remind you that love in all its forms is always worth fighting for.